It was just after sunrise when a lone figure stepped out of a beat-up pickup truck onto the cracked asphalt of a quiet precinct parking lot. The August heat was already clinging to the air, thick and unrelenting, as humidity clung to his skin like a warning. He wore an old hoodie faded from years of use, jeans with frayed cuffs, and sneakers that had clearly seen better days. No one would guess that the man brushing dust off his sleeves was about to flip this entire precinct on its head. To the officers of Riverstone, a tucked-away southern town nestled between forgotten backroads and fading traditions, today was just another Tuesday. But for Jeremiah Cole, it was day one. Not just his first day on the job, but the first step in a mission that had been building for over 20 years. Jeremiah wasn't your average police chief. He was a strategist, a listener, a man who'd seen firsthand how rot could grow in the dark corners of law enforcement. And in this town, one that had long whispered about corruption, cover-ups, and cruelty behind the badge, he knew the only way to get to the truth was to see it for himself. Not from behind a polished desk, not through scheduled meetings or sanitized briefings, but from the ground up, as one of them, or at least as someone they'd ignore. And so, he entered their world not as Chief Cole, but as just another man no one would notice. He kept his head down as he moved through the lot, pretending to fumble with a folded paper as if looking for directions. Nearby, officers stood in small clusters, sipping coffee, laughing loudly, trading inside jokes like poker chips. Some glanced at him, none greeted him, exactly what he expected. The building loomed ahead, the familiar shape of a precinct, gray bricks, reinforced windows, a flag limp in the still summer air. Jeremiah hesitated for a moment at the entrance, took a deep breath, and stepped inside. It smelled like every precinct he'd ever known: disinfectant, burnt coffee, and something faintly metallic. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Desks cluttered with paperwork stretched across the open room, and officers moved through the space with a confidence that came from knowing no one was watching. Except now, someone was. He hadn't been inside 5 minutes when it happened. A voice called out from across the room, sharp and soaked in arrogance. "Hey, you lost, old man?" Jeremiah turned toward the voice, slow and careful. The man approaching him was tall, mid-30s, with slicked back blonde hair and a cocky strut that screamed entitlement. His badge hung loose on his chest, and his smirk was already halfway to his ears. "Yeah, you," the officer said, stepping closer. "This ain't a soup kitchen. Whatever you're looking for, it ain't here." Jeremiah didn't flinch. He met the man's eyes. You're just in the wrong place," the officer interrupted, stepping into his space. "We got enough to deal with without vagrants loitering around." Several officers nearby had paused to watch. One leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. Another nudged his partner and grinned. No one said a word to stop it. Jeremiah stayed calm. "I'm not here to cause trouble." "Well, you found it anyway," the officer snapped. Then, without hesitation, he spit, right in Jeremiah's face. The room seemed to freeze. The slow drip of coffee from a broken machine, the crackle of a nearby scanner, the sound of saliva hitting skin. It all landed like a punch. Jeremiah stood still, eyes narrowing just slightly, the spit sliding slowly down his cheek. Around him, laughter bubbled up, quiet at first, then louder. "That's what we do to trash around here," the officer muttered. Jeremiah wiped his face with a handkerchief, calm, controlled, waiting. He looked at the man, really looked, took in the name tag. Officer C. Rourke. He didn't say a word, just turned and walked away. But not out the door. No, he was headed somewhere very specific now. It was time. 15 minutes later, the precinct's main briefing room buzzed with noise. Chairs scraped against the floor, officers filtered in with coffees and clipboards, settling into their usual spots. "Any idea what this meeting's about?" one asked. "No clue," said another, yawning. "Probably some memo about parking." The door opened near the front. Captain Lena Mendez stepped up to the podium. a no-nonsense woman who'd been holding things together in the vacuum left by the last chief's retirement. Her face was as unreadable as ever. "All right, folks, quiet down," she said. "We've got someone important to meet today." Jeremiah entered from the side, this time dressed in a crisp button-down and pressed slacks. His badge, heavy, silver, and real, gleamed against his belt. His face was clean now. His back was straight. He stepped into the light. The room fell silent. Officer Rourke's smirk died instantly, mouth slightly open. His face paled like blood draining from a wound. He blinked twice, trying to make sense of the man now standing in front of the entire department. Jeremiah stood still for a long moment, letting the silence settle. Then he spoke. "Good morning," he said. "My name is Jeremiah Cole. As of this morning, I am your new chief of police." Gasps audible. Some officers sat straighter. A few exchanged panicked glances. Rourke's Adam's apple bobbed like he was trying to swallow a rock. "I walked through these doors today dressed like a nobody, because I needed to see who you really are when no one's watching." He paused. "Absolutely. Here's the next section of the story, continuing directly from where we left off. Now I know." The silence in the room was thick, suffocating. Even the air conditioning seemed to hesitate. Chief Cole's voice remained calm, but it carried weight. Not the weight of authority forced upon people, but the kind earned over decades. It was the kind of voice that made grown men think twice. "I've been in this line of work for 27 years, he continued. "I've led joint task forces. I've worked narcotics, gang units, homicide. I've buried friends who wore this same badge, and I've spent every one of those years believing that the badge means something." He let that linger, and yet, this morning, I was spit on by one of my own, laughed at, dismissed, treated like garbage. Jeremiah slowly walked toward the row of officers seated on the right. No one stepped in. No one said, "Hey, that's not how we treat people." Not one of you stood up. He wasn't shouting. He didn't need to. The quiet fire in his words was enough. "I wasn't testing your training. I wasn't looking for protocol. I was testing your character. And I have to tell you right now, this department is failing." The room was stone still. Officer Rourke sat frozen in place, his face blank, the confidence wiped away like fog on glass. He tried to avoid eye contact, but Jeremiah wasn't looking away. "I know what's been happening here. The whispers, the complaints that disappear, the beatings that never make the report, the unofficial warnings that turn into bruises. I've read every file. I've watched every video. I know this department's dirty secrets." A few officers shifted in their seats. "Some of you," he said, turning slightly, "still believe in the oath you took. You still serve with honor, even in the mess. To you, I say, I'm here to fight with you, not against you." Then his eyes cut back to Rourke. "But some of you?" He shook his head. "You're about to find out what happens when a man like me cleans house." Jeremiah didn't waste time. That very afternoon, internal affairs officers from out of state, people he had personally vetted, arrived at the precinct in unmarked vehicles. They weren't locals. They owed nothing to the corrupt roots embedded in Riverstone PD. A private team began pulling files, computers, even locker contents. Surveillance footage was reviewed, anonymous tips reopened, body cam audits were initiated, and Officer C. Rourke suspended immediately. Pending investigation, they said. But everyone knew what that meant. Word spread like wildfire. News vans circled within hours, hungry for the story. Riverstone had long been overlooked, but this was scandal. And scandals sell. Inside the precinct, the atmosphere flipped. Some officers walked on eggshells, suddenly unsure of the behaviors they'd long considered normal. Others whispered with relief, seeing someone finally stand up to the unspoken rules. Jeremiah didn't let up. He walked the halls, listened, took notes, remembered every face. He met with the families of those mistreated by the department, men and women who had been brushed aside, bruised, even buried in silence. He apologized, not with words alone, but with action. He reinstated an old ethics board, ordered random reviews of body cam footage, called for updated training, real training, grounded in de-escalation, trauma awareness, community response. And then he did the unthinkable. He invited the community in. It was held in the old town hall, a dusty chamber with stained windows and wooden pews that creaked under weight. The crowd that gathered that night filled every seat, lined the walls, spilled into the hallway. Some came angry, some came curious, most came carrying stories. Chief Cole stood at the front with no podium, no microphone, just a notepad, a pen, and an open door behind him. "This room," he said, "is now yours. Tell me everything." And they did. One woman, elderly and trembling, described how her grandson had been arrested after calling the police for help. Another, a man who limped to the microphone with a cane, told of the time he'd been beaten for resisting while handcuffed. A teenager, nervous but firm, spoke of being stopped and searched 4 times in 1 week. No charges, no reason. The stories kept coming, some heartbreaking, some enraging, all real. Jeremiah took notes, asked questions, promised follow-ups, and kept those promises. He stayed hours past the end of the meeting, speaking with anyone who still had something to say. By the time he finally walked back to his car, the night air was thick and still. But something had shifted. This wasn't just a town airing grievances anymore. It was a town waking up. But not everyone was on board. A faction of the department began to grumble louder. Officers who had long benefited from the broken system saw their power shrinking, their secrets threatened. One anonymous message was slid under Jeremiah's office door. "Keep digging, and you'll end up in a hole of your own." He didn't flinch. Instead, he ordered a full review of the K-9 unit. That same day, another officer was quietly escorted out, caught falsifying evidence in 3 separate arrests. A week later, 2 senior detectives resigned without warning. Rumors swirled about a sealed indictment. But Jeremiah didn't feed the fire. He stayed focused, methodical. "We don't burn this place down," he told his second-in-command. "We rebuild it, one truth at a time." Not everyone who stayed was on Jeremiah's side. In the days that followed the high-profile suspensions and resignations, he began to notice the silent resistance, the glances, the whispers that fell silent when he walked into a room. Emails went unanswered, meeting requests ignored. Some officers stopped wearing their name tags altogether, an old trick meant to maintain plausible deniability when things got messy. And yet, Chief Cole never wavered. He understood something many didn't. Change doesn't start with force. It starts with consistency. He began arriving at the precinct even earlier, long before the morning briefings. He took time to learn every officer's name, even the ones who clearly didn't want to learn his. He showed up at calls, unannounced, sometimes in uniform, sometimes not. He reviewed footage. He walked the beat. When he entered a room, there was no longer nervous laughter. There was respect or fear. He didn't mind which, but beneath the surface, something deeper had started to shift. It was a Thursday morning when Officer Lucia Marquez knocked on his office door. She looked tired, more so than usual. Her voice was low, uncertain. "Chief, can I talk to you in private?" Jeremiah closed his laptop and nodded. "Of course." She stepped inside and shut the door behind her. "I've been here 6 years," she began, "and I kept my head down. I told myself I had to earn my place, that things would change on their own." She hesitated, voice catching. "But after what happened to you, what Rourke did, I realized I've been part of the problem too. Not like them, but by staying silent." Jeremiah leaned forward. "You're not the first to tell me that, Officer Marquez, but you are the first one to walk into my office and take responsibility." She slid a folder across the desk. "It's everything I've got. Complaints that were ignored. Officers who bragged about roughing people up. Names, dates. I wrote it all down." Jeremiah opened the folder. His eyes scanned the pages. Handwritten notes, photocopies of redacted reports. internal emails forwarded to a personal account. He looked up. "You understand what this means, right?" She nodded. "Yeah, I do. But it means more to finally do the right thing." That file became Exhibit A in a department-wide audit, and Officer Marquez, she became a key member of the newly formed Accountability Task Force. As weeks turned into months, the precinct changed shape. Officers who had thrived in the shadows were forced into the light. Every policy was reviewed. Use of force guidelines were rewritten from the ground up. Officers attended mandatory workshops, not just in legal procedure, but in emotional intelligence, trauma response, and bias recognition. And it wasn't just window dressing. One sergeant was demoted after mocking a domestic violence survivor during a call. Another was placed on unpaid leave after a recorded tirade against a local protest group surfaced online. The message was clear. The old rules no longer applied. You either evolved or you were gone. Chief Cole's biggest change came in the form of a community-led initiative. The Civilian Oversight Committee, or COC, was made up of teachers, faith leaders, small business owners, and formerly incarcerated citizens. It had teeth. The committee had the power to review complaints, request footage, and even recommend disciplinary action. It wasn't just about punishment, it was about transparency. For the first time in Riverstone's history, the people had a voice inside the department, not just outside shouting to be heard. Some officers balked at the idea. What do they know about policing? One lieutenant muttered during a closed-door meeting. Chief Cole heard him. They know what it's like to be on the other side of the badge. That's what policing is supposed to be about. Understanding, not intimidation. It wasn't until the town's annual summer parade that the full impact of the change became clear. For decades, the Riverstone Police Department had led the parade. Stoic, cold, often met with reluctant applause at best. But this year, something was different. Jeremiah didn't ride in a cruiser. He walked, side by side with Officer Marquez and a handful of rookies chosen not for who they knew, but for how they served. As they turned the corner onto Main Street, the crowd stood. Not just polite clapping, real applause. Children waved, elders nodded. Storefronts displayed signs that read, "Accountability matters" and "Trust earned." For a town that once feared its police force, the sight was unprecedented. Jeremiah didn't smile to soak it in. He just nodded, like a man still watching, still working. He knew better than to think the work was done. A few days after the parade, an envelope arrived at his office. No return address, no postmark. Inside, a single photo. It was of Jeremiah standing in front of the precinct, face unreadable. On the back, a handwritten message. "We're still here." He stared at it for a long time. He knew what it meant. Some of the rot in Riverstone ran deeper than uniforms and badges. There were people outside the department, powerful ones, who liked things the way they were. Developers, judges, politicians. People who had quietly profited from a system built on silence and fear. Jeremiah slid the photo into a drawer, not out of fear, but out of focus. It was a reminder. This wasn't just a department he was fighting to clean. It was a city, and the real battle had only just begun. Riverstone had changed, but not everyone wanted it to. And some of those people had roots so deep they didn't fear the shifting tides. They waited them out. One of those roots was Martin Greaves, a former city councilman turned property mogul. Greaves had spent decades accumulating power through backroom deals, hush money, and partnerships with the very officers Jeremiah had purged. When the Oversight Committee began investigating a suspicious uptick in evictions on the city's south end, properties bought by shell companies, people tossed out for minor code violations, it all led back to one name, Greaves Holdings. Jeremiah couldn't ignore it. He met with the city attorney, then with the mayor, then with Greaves himself. An icy sit-down in the back of a private country club lounge. Greaves didn't bother with small talk. "I've been here longer than you've been alive, Chief. You think because you've got a badge and some goodwill, you can come after me?" Jeremiah sipped his water. "Number, I think I can come after you because people deserve better. And now, I've got the receipts." Greaves smirked. "You don't understand how things work." "I do now," Jeremiah said, and I'm not afraid of how they used to. That meeting was the beginning of the end for Greaves. It also marked a turning point. Jeremiah was no longer just cleaning up the department. He was taking on the city's oldest power structures. Jeremiah had a younger brother once, Malik, 2 years younger, charismatic, wild, always getting into trouble, but never for anything serious, until the night he didn't come home. Jeremiah was 19 when it happened. Malik had been walking home from a party when a routine stop turned violent. The officer said Malik reached for something. The body cam was malfunctioning, and the report? Buried under bureaucracy and sealed. Jeremiah never forgot. He never said Malik's name publicly, not when he became an officer, not even when he became chief. But one night, months after the parade, he stood before the graduating class of the police academy. Young faces, some hopeful, some hardened. He took a deep breath. You're not just getting a badge, you're getting a weapon that can end someone's life. That should scare you, because it scares me. He paused, eyes finding a cadet in the front row. I became a cop because my little brother never came home. The officer who took his life never faced a single consequence. I didn't come here to protect power, I came here to protect people. The room was silent. It was the first time anyone had heard him speak about Malik. It was also the first time many of those cadets realized what justice really meant to the man leading them. Despite the reforms, the oversight committee, and the internal changes, there was still one name Jeremiah hadn't been able to pin down: the leak. Evidence kept slipping. Reports got erased. Suspects got tipped off. Someone was still working against him. So he set a trap. An internal memo, fake, was created, detailing a planned raid on a warehouse suspected of housing stolen police gear. The memo had one recipient, Lieutenant Darren Kincaid. Kincaid had been around for 20 years. Clean record, friendly with everyone. Too friendly. Within 48 hours, the warehouse was empty, scrubbed, and Jeremiah had his answer. He confronted Kincaid in the locker room. "You know what I did, don't you?" Kincaid asked, almost amused. Jeremiah nodded. "Yeah, and you know what comes next. You think getting rid of me will solve this?" "No," Jeremiah said, "but it'll slow you down." Kincaid was escorted out that afternoon. He didn't fight it, he just smiled, like a man who knew the game wasn't over. By the time the 1-year anniversary of Jeremiah's appointment rolled around, Riverstone was almost unrecognizable. The crime rate had dropped, not just because of enforcement, but because of investment in schools, housing, mental health response units. The department was leaner, more disciplined. Diversity had increased, so had trust. Jeremiah was invited to speak at a national policing conference in D.C. His speech was broadcast live, but he turned it down. Instead, he showed up at a town hall meeting in South End. A group of teens had organized a roundtable to talk about policing and community safety. He sat with them for 3 hours, took notes, listened. When one of them asked, "Do you ever think about quitting?" Jeremiah smiled. "Every day, but I think about staying even more." 2 years in, Officer Marquez became the first woman of color promoted to captain in department history. Recruits began coming from different backgrounds: activists, social workers, veterans. The department started partnering with neighborhood groups for non-police emergency responses. The Oversight Committee's reports were now published quarterly, with a live Q&A hosted by Jeremiah himself. Even the media, once skeptical, began to change its tone. One headline read, "From undercover to unstoppable, Chief Jeremiah Cole's mission to save a city." But Jeremiah wasn't interested in headlines. He still kept Malik's photo in his desk. He still walked the streets, unannounced, especially at night. 3 years in, Jeremiah received a call from the governor's office. A statewide commission on policing was being formed. They wanted him to chair it. It was a chance to take what he'd done in Riverstone and scale it. But it would mean stepping away. He sat with the decision for weeks. He walked the precinct halls late at night, just like he used to. He stood outside the station as the sun rose, watching officers clock in. And then he made his choice. At a press conference, he stood beside Officer Marquez, now Captain Marquez, and said, This job was never meant to be permanent. It was meant to be a blueprint. The real legacy isn't in what I did. It's in who comes next. He handed her his badge. The crowd applauded, and just like that, the man who had infiltrated the rot cleaned it from the inside and rebuilt it from the ground up, stepped away, not in defeat, but in triumph, because sometimes the bravest thing a warrior can do is let go.